Welcome to the 2021 Endangered Places program announcement. I'm CBS 4 meteorologist Dave Aguilera. Colorado Preservation began the Endangered Places program in 1998 as a way to highlight important historic resources in Colorado that were in danger of being lost. CPI receives nominations from the public throughout the year and selects only a few to be listed each year. In order to be listed, EPP sites must be historically important and exhibit a high level of community support. Over the years, CPI has listed everything from industrial sites to one-room schoolhouses, from mines to places of entertainment and worship. All of these sites help tell the story of Colorado's development from its first native inhabitants to the early pioneers and landscapes of the modern age. Their listing brings much needed attention to these places, as well as resources from groups like CPI and their partners to help preserve them for future generations. CBS 4 has been proud to partner with CPI for the past 20 years, bringing the stories of these places to life. This is my third year hosting this event, and while I wish we could all do this in person, I'm honored to be part of it no matter how we get together. This year, we will be adding 3 sites to the Endangered Places program, bringing the total number of sites on the list to 130. Of those sites, 52 have been saved, including 2 sites we will tell you about later on in the program. 24 sites are listed in alert status, but we have only lost 7 sites over the years. Before we announce the 3 sites added this year to the list, I want to take a moment to thank the crew at CBS 4 who make these stories possible. Producer and editor Kevin Strong has been working with CPI since 2002, writing and editing each piece and then compiling each year's stories into a half-hour special we air in the spring. This year, Kevin was assisted by photographers Robert Gaidetsky, Robert Sanchez, and Eric Bloomer. The first site on this year's list is actually a collection of sites, 46 of them to be exact. They're all located across the state, and chances are that many of you have seen them as you've driven our state's highways, but didn't know it as you passed over them. They are the historic bridges of Colorado.
When you see this bridge, you know you're in Red Cliff.
The High Arch Bridge at Red Cliff, Colorado, rises 209 feet above the Eagle River.
Bridges can tell stories. As artifacts, they can reveal the history of a county, a town, a state.
Walking under the arches of Red Cliff Bridge transports Kathy Hiker back to the 1930s.
The Red Cliff Bridge is an artifact that came out of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's economic recovery programs during the Great Depression. That was a time when the federal government kicked in a lot of money for road improvements to both jumpstart the economy, and also the improvements were needed.
For 2 years, workers braved frigid temperatures, suspended high above the river below.
There are stories of workers spending the entire day on this bridge. They were hoisted up in buckets or on platforms. They packed their lunches with them. And when the workers left, the kids would come out, and they used the structure like monkey bars on a school playground.
The bridge would eliminate 2 miles of steep, narrow mountain roads.
A columnist, actually for the state legislature, came and saw the bridge, and he wrote about this is the end of the white-knuckle drivings where you're praying that you'll get past Red Cliff.
Travelers crossing the bridge can appreciate its utility and beauty as they round Battle Mountain. But many times we cross bridges without even knowing it.
Oftentimes we go from point A to point B in a bit of a hurry, right? And are thinking more about how we get there than what we're looking at while we're en route.
The Colorado Department of Transportation wants to see more attention placed on historic bridges. Director Shoshana Liu believes they play an important role in cultural identity.
Things like roads and bridges, are extraordinarily important for the utility of getting where we need to go today. But they also can take us back to periods of time that are foundational, for the sort of culture of Colorado.
CDOT studied their bridges with an eye for history and practicality.
First and foremost, we need it to work. I mean, many of these bridges don't work for today's purposes, so you can't just keep them the way they were. And oftentimes it's very expensive to try and upgrade in place.
They identified 46 bridges in their system, which have historic value and a high probability of being preserved.
This bridge behind me, the Cherry Creek Bridge, was built in 1946.
Historian Lisa Schock points to some recent success stories.
We were able to preserve the original arch on the bridge while still widening the structure so that it could meet the current transportation needs. We're really looking at some of these bridges that are in this nomination to try to determine if we can balance that. Can we keep it in place and still meet transportation needs in the future?
The bridges come in all different shapes, sizes, and materials.
Zarecillo Canyon, which is on State Highway 12, is a WPA bridge. It's built on a skew and it has really beautiful stone-faced piers. I also really love Rainbow Falls. It's tucked away in a canyon. It carries US 24. A lot of people have gone there to put graffiti on our bridge substructure, so it has this sort of interesting cultural feel to it.
Some bridges were built using local materials, such as volcanic rock on the Rio Seco Creek Bridge in San Luis.
To me, they're historic properties. To the engineers at CDOT, they're functional features.
We look at safety demands, we look at condition, and we look at how we can bring it back up to meet today's safety standards.
For CDOT engineer Michael Collins, that presents a delicate balancing act.
Bridges are kind of like an old house, right? Buying an old house and having that charm and living in it, being able to see it as part of the original design for the landscape of where that bridge is located, trying to retain that as much as possible, but being able to bring it updated to today's safety standards and to be able to bring it back to today's functional needs.
Meeting those needs creates challenges. For example, those old steel truss bridges, they have low vertical clearance issues and
a lot of the safety rail, there's no good place to really mount it on those bridges, and so we have to get creative in how we can try to bring the safety standards back up.
Not easy and not cheap.
Figuring out where the places that you get the most bang for your buck and preserving those links can be, it's something that's a challenge for us as we develop our infrastructure.
It's a conversation CDOT is looking forward to continuing with local communities.
We want people to sort of, broaden the spectrum a little bit of what can be historic and what's important to local and state history.
That's why it is important to keep records, preserve where it is possible to preserve, and make sure that these bridges remain a part of Colorado's history.
CDOT officials hope that the discussion of the historic bridges also spreads to the county and local levels, so historic bridges which are not owned by the state can also be preserved. We'd also like to thank B. Travis Wright for his help gathering some of the aerial drone footage for this piece. With 46 bridges on the list, divide and conquer was the order of the day to get footage of as many as possible. Next, we head to southern Colorado to visit a site which played a key role in the westward expansion and the ending of indigenous slavery in Colorado. The home of Lafayette Head and the Ute Indian Agency in Conejos County.
And so I've always had a interest in old adobe buildings. So you can see the size of the logs.
Ron Rail grew up in Conejos, Colorado.
All of the openings face this interior courtyard.
As a professor of architecture, he enjoys refurbishing adobe buildings, especially those in his hometown.
I came across this building and it said it was in Conejos, and I had never seen this building in my life, even though I grew up here. These buildings may date back to as far as 1855, when the community from Guadalupe moved across the river and settled here. This would have been one of the more formal rooms.
Rail became the newest owner of the oldest buildings in Conejos.
They become layers of history generally, and what I've done here a little bit is expose that history.
These aren't just any oldest buildings, though. They are what is left of the home of Lafayette Head, Colorado pioneer, Indian agent, and first lieutenant governor.
It's referred to in different ways at different times: fort, compound house, diplomatic center. Certainly, he was the jefe. He was in charge of this site.
Dr. Esteban Rael Galvez wrote about Lafayette Head as part of his dissertation.
He's caught up, as so many young men at that particular period, in an imperial project of manifest destiny to conquer another land.
While the land looked tranquil, it was anything but.
It's an overlapping of empires and contested homelands. This would have been the northern part of the Mexican republic. Would have been homeland for the Ute people.
Lafayette Head immersed himself in that diversity. He married a Hispanic woman and became well connected to the Native American populations as well.
And in many ways, he was bound up in the entire community.
His compound became a cultural crossroads.
There were Ute delegations settled here on this site, grist mills and sawmills. It was a vast site with so many things going on. What we're looking at here is a courtyard that was once filled with life, surrounded by an adobe building that served as a fort but also served all these other cultural and governmental purposes. This was at one time an interior wall. This part of the house was very formal. It would be where the lieutenant governor received guests, political dignitaries from all over the nation, but also dignitaries of the Ute Nation.
If you think of those primary institutions, political and certainly religious, Lafayette Head was involved in them.
Head went to Washington to meet with President Lincoln and negotiate treaties with the Native American tribes.
Ute people at times reviled him because they felt that he was taking advantage of them. And other times when he is celebrated because he's bringing communities together.
The site harbors signs of a darker chapter in Colorado's history as well.
Part of that history involves the history of slavery in Conejos County. And so within the oral history, this is known to be the slaves' quarters.
Indigenous slavery in the American Southwest often gets skipped over in the history books.
Captives in Conejos County were typically children that were brought into Conejos County and sold to the church and distributed to the community members through adoption.
Lafayette Head, a slave owner himself, created a detailed list of all the indigenous slaves in the area.
This effort resulted by the fact that Andrew Johnson required all Indian agents, all federal agents, to actually end the practice of indigenous slavery.
Today, the town of Conejos shows no signs of its place in Colorado's rich history.
I tell people this was the capital of the territory. They look at me like, what rock did you hit your head on?
Demetrio Valdez lived in the compound as a young child.
You know, there's a plaza there, houses all around. The governor's mansion went from here clear almost to that wall over there.
The part of the compound Valdez lived in has since been torn down.
Once we moved out, you know, kids playing around, broke the windows, broke the doors, you know, vandalized everything.
Back in '65, my dad ordered the county to knock them down.
Michael Giron lived in the part that still stands.
There used to be a door over here.
Giron lived here until 2009. It's sat vacant ever since.
I was glad somebody had bought it, that interest in it. 10 years down the road, I hope to see it alive again.
Pitched Roof is a later addition, and it's an addition that tells the story of the history of the coming of the railroad, of sawmills, of different kinds of technology.
Ron Rail sees opportunities for continued education.
This building, in many ways, is this three-dimensional history lesson that tells a really complex history of the many different kinds of people who occupied this site.
People like Lafayette Head.
For many individuals, he becomes a hero because he's fighting for their rights. But he's, like many people, complicated and layered, just like this site.
Ron Rail hopes to be able to restore Lafayette Head's home to show how it looked at various periods throughout history, rather than just one point in time. That way people can see how changes in the building over time reflected its changing role in the history of Conejos. Our last site sits in the mountains of Colorado as a testament to a different kind of pioneer. The pioneers who put Colorado's ski industry on the map. We head now to Winter Park and the Balcony House.
It's all about location, location, location.
Winter Park is synonymous with one thing.
There's so much ski history here, ski jumping to alpine skiing.
In 1940, the top of Berthoud Pass had recently been developed as a ski area, but narrow, winding mountain roads made getting there difficult.
Ski enthusiasts scouted a possible location. Where can we put a ski resort? And the answer was pretty obvious. It was at West Portal.
West Portal was where the railroad emerged from the Moffat Tunnel. Winter Park Ski Resort quickly sprang up at the tunnel entrance.
We had something that no other ski resort had, which is access to a rail line that dropped passengers off right here at the base.
With skiers able to easily make the trek from Denver on the train, Winter Park Resort grew quickly. Resort founders needed a suitable base camp to provide skier services. In 1955, they built Balcony House.
It was designed by, founders of the ski area who weren't even, really quote unquote architects, but they certainly had the talent.
Architect Jim Johnson says the building's style reflects Winter Park's unique vibe.
It just resonates with the spirit of Winter Park in terms of inventiveness, bold ideas, creative, playful windows. Balconies are, I call them cascading. Large windows really opening to the south side, I think feels indigenous to the context of the mountains.
What fabulous architecture, the mid-century modern. The Balcony House has been the anchor for everything that's gone on.
Janet Engel and Wendy Christensen grew up right next door.
This was our front yard. We grew up playing around, learning how to ski.
Our parents owned the ski shop and the ski school here.
It was built the year that Janet was born.
The building's designers relied on their father for advice while designing Balcony House.
He grew up in a plumbing family, so Steve Bradley, talked to Dad about wherefores on how to do some of the plumbing.
The Balcony House served many roles over the years.
Ticket booth, it was the cafeteria.
The place to go in the morning was the coffee and tea market. Our parents at one time owned a soap company, and it was also down where the men's bathrooms are now.
It became the daycare center.
So many reincarnations and reinventions have happened to it, but all along it has always been the place where you go meet at the end of the day.
Today, the coffee shop still showcases the building's unique architecture, but renovations have covered over the building's once prominent role in Winter Park's history.
Part of history, too, is evolution, right? So things need to change with the changing needs of our market and our demographics and the skiers.
Winter Park CEO Sky Folks says competition drives change.
What's core to our DNA, we need to keep, but when we think about services and facilities, it needs to evolve with the customer base.
We've always really done things here to honor our history. Part of history is architecture, etc., but the real basis of history is the culture.
Gary DeFrange oversaw the creation of the master plan, which will shape Winter Park's future. The existing Balcony House does not figure into that plan. DeFrange says the building is nearing the end of its useful life.
If you look at this building, number one, structurally, it's a real challenge. I can't tell you how many times when I was here we had to go in and reinforce the foundation of this building. The building itself just does not function or accommodate what we need to do to take care of skiers and visitors and their families and riders year-round.
He says the plans pay tribute to the history of the site.
There's a way to rebuild this building, and there's a way to maintain the history and show that we're respecting the history, not only of the building, but of Steve Bradley, who was the guy that built it.
Those wanting to save the building see things differently.
There's really no bad time to save a classic building.
Jim Johnson worked on the renovation of Denver's Union Station. He sees the same potential in Balcony House, mixing the old with new construction behind it.
There's definitely a win-win approach to this whole thing where, the great parts of the Balcony House can be saved, the less functional parts can be eliminated, but you keep the essence of the design and you get magic out of the result.
Many view historic preservation in terms of either or. Either we keep this building or we demolish it. And it really needs to be reframed as both and. We can have both this historic building and have thoughtful additions to it that service the needs of a growing ski resort.
For those who grew up on the front porch of Balcony House, preserving the building maintains the vision of Winter Park's developers.
We both grew up with the man that designed it and built it, and he was amazing in himself. It's a tribute to his vision, too, and I don't want to lose that.
So there you have it, the 3 new places listed for Colorado's most endangered places for 2021. Colorado Preservation Incorporated looks forward to helping these sites achieve their goals in the years to come. We would like to say thank you to Eagle and Grand County Historical Societies, the Ingle family, as well as the Luther Bean Museum at Adams State University for their help with historic photographs. Thank you also to all who were involved in nominating these sites, and CPI for your efforts in saving these places. We wish you all luck as you move forward in your preservation efforts. As many of you know firsthand, saving places doesn't come easy. It takes time and commitment, from the initial nomination to the official saved title. Those involved with the sites on this list will endure years of fundraising, sweat equity, and a bit of learning on the job. For 52 of the places listed in the Endangered Places program, that perseverance has paid off. This year, we are proud to announce 2 new sites added to the saved list. They are the Goodnight Barn in Pueblo and the Gold Medal Orchard in Cortez. The Goodnight Barn was listed as one of Colorado's most endangered places in 2002. It was originally built in 1868 by Charles Goodnight, the cattle baron whose name most often is associated with the Goodnight Loving Trail that ran from Texas to Colorado. Nearly 2 decades later, it is considered saved thanks to the efforts of many. Mike and Mark De Herrera from the Goal Academy bring us this update.
Hello, my name is Laurel Campbell. I am the president of Goodnight Barn Historic Preservation, Inc., and the chairperson of the Goodnight Barn stakeholders. In 1976, the Goodnight Barn was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. In 2002, Texas Tech wanted to disassemble the barn and move it all the way down to their little ranching area at Texas Tech. However, disassembling it and reassembling it would have taken it off the historic register, and we denied that. The committee was formed in 2014 to move forward on the restoration, and over that 6 years, or 5 years, I guess, we raised money, we had chuck wagon dinners, and being on the EPP, or the Endangered Places program list, really motivated people to continue to help us raise money. In fall of 2020, it was considered saved, and I'm now going to have Bill tell you a little bit more about the history and the dates of what happened.
Hi there, Bill Zwick, Capital Project Manager. Okay, the barn was acquired in 2004 because it was placed on the Endangered Places list. Texas Tech wanted the building for their part of their museum. So the city and the community pulled together and purchased the building for $191,000. The State Historical Fund was part of that, the Pueblo County Historical Society and Frontier Pathway Scenic Byway. In 2012, the historic structure assessment was done and also funded by State Historic Fund. Architect Slater Paul was the architect. That was $13,000. In 2015, drawings were made and paid for by the local community. No grants were done. We raised the money because we wanted to hurry up the process and skip a grant round. That was $37,000. In 2015, we did emergency stabilization grant to hold the barn up, and we had the fortresses on the barn. Ark Valley was a contractor, and that was $34,000. 2019 and previous to that, we put the project up for bid 3 different times, and it came over budget. We went back to the starting block and went for some more grant funds with the Department of Local Affairs for a total grant in a dollar amount of $1,060,000. So that got us going, and that's where we're at today. The contractor was H.W. Houston Construction with Bill Grande with Block by Block. The architect through HCM was Formworks Design Group, and the engineer was JVA Engineering. We're really excited that we can fulfill the Endangered Places program and call this done for 2020. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anytime a historic resource is considered saved, it is certainly a cause for celebration. But our next save may be the sweetest save yet. The Gold Medal Orchard in Montezuma County got its name from the award it won for its prized apples at the World's Fair in 1904. Since then, many of the unique varieties of fruits produced by this and other small orchards have been lost to the commercialization of the produce industry. When CPI first listed Gold Medal Orchard in 2015, the original orchard was down to a little less than 7 acres. The landowners partnered with Montezuma Orchard Restoration Association and a local horticulturalist who began working to regraft and regrow some of these heirloom fruits.
This old tree is like me. We've been here for a long time.
Vivian Kenyon grew up in the Gold Medal Orchard.
The orchard originally was planted by Jimmy Giles.
Giles soon sold the orchard to the Reverend Howard Antes. He put Montezuma County produce on the world stage when in 1904 he took his fruit to the St. Louis Exposition, where it won the coveted gold medal.
That was why they called it the Gold Medal Orchard. My dad purchased the property in 1922. He was a very savvy farmer, and he took good care of his land.
She and her husband Philip worked the orchard until 1970. After that, the unique varieties that made the Gold Medal Orchard famous faded into the landscape.
Apple trees want to make apples. That's their job in the world.
Horticulturalist Jude Schuenmeyer learned about the old varieties and wanted to bring them back.
And I'll graft this onto a rootstock, and that's how trees were made.
He took cuttings from the trees in the Gold Medal Orchard and other historic fruit trees in Montezuma County.
We don't have to know what all of these are to know that they're old and they're part of the genetic bank that we can bring back. There's at least 4 trees in here.
6 years later, the seedlings, which started in this greenhouse, have now been restored to the Gold Medal Orchard, where they will grow and produce fruit for the years to come.
Apples would be wonderful, but you know, I am partial to peaches, I have to tell you.
Montezuma Orchard Restoration Project would like to thank Colorado Preservation Inc. for the opportunity to show the people of Colorado just how special the Gold Medal Orchard is. We'd like to thank the Montezuma County Historical Society for being our first partners in telling us about the incredible history of orchards in Montezuma County. We'd especially like to thank Joyce Lawrence, who is also a founding board member, for all of her work and dedication for getting the Gold Medal Orchard site initially listed on the Most Endangered Place list. We'd like to thank History Colorado and the State Historic Fund for the educational grant which allowed the documentation and interpretive signs at the Gold Medal Orchard. We'd really like to thank Dr. Ruth Lambert for all of her professionalism in helping us document this site. We'd like to thank the USDA and Colorado Department of Agriculture for the grants that allowed MORP to find and propagate these rarest of the rare trees that are now in the Gold Medal Orchard. We'd like to thank the AmeriCorps service members and team members for all of their work digging the holes and clearing the brush and planting the trees. We'd like to thank the MORP board, volunteers, and donors which allow us to do what we do. We couldn't do it without them. We'd like to thank all of the people across Colorado that let us into their orchards and told us stories of their families and the trees and allowed us to take cuttings from these rare trees, which became the basis for the replanting at the Gold Medal Orchard. And finally and especially, we'd like to thank Philip and Vivian Kenyon and their families. It's Phil and Vivian's love of the past and their belief in the future which made this project happen.
Thank you for joining us today and learning more about this important program of Colorado Preservation Incorporated. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, CBS 4 will be airing a special called Colorado's Most Endangered Places, which will showcase the 3 sites on this year's list, as well as those 2 saved sites. We don't have a specific air date yet, but please follow CPI on Facebook to learn when it will air. On behalf of Kevin and all of the crew at CBS 4, I want to thank each of you for your efforts in historic preservation that makes saves like these possible. And now it's my honor to introduce the director of CPI's Endangered Places program, Kim Grant, for some closing remarks.
Congratulations to the 3 newly listed sites on Colorado's most endangered places. Congratulations to the Lafayette Head Home and Ute Indian Agency, the Winter Park Balcony House, and a statewide listing, Historic Bridges of Colorado. CPI looks forward to working with these communities and organizations and people to move these sites to the status of a save in the future. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Alpine Bank for their generous sponsorship of Colorado's most endangered places, and in particular for their support of our weekend workshops. Weekend workshops provide volunteer opportunities for hands-on preservation activities at sites across Colorado. Most recently, we worked on the Foxton Post Office in Jefferson County, and this summer we hope to do an Adobe workshop in the San Luis Valley at the Lafayette Head House. I'd also like to tell you, in anticipation of the future, that the Colorado's Most Endangered Places program is nearing its 25th anniversary. In light of that, we are planning special celebrations and activities to mark that milestone in the program's history. We've also embarked on a comprehensive program review, looking at nearly 50 other organizations around the country that have endangered places programs to find out how we can work better with the communities and how we can increase communications by and amongst the sites that are listed. So stay tuned for that in the near future. Stay tuned also today for the Preservation Marketplace, which will include a special address from Senate Majority Leader Steve Finberg, who knows all about preservation, owning a historic bar in Silver Plume. We also have our silent auction going on, and we'll have nearly 200 items that you can bid on. This is an important way that we raise matching funds for the Endangered Places program, which is funded in part by a state historical fund grant from History Colorado. And as always, thank you for your support, past, present, and future.